The agenda for today is as follows. We're definitely going to take a look at hacktivism with ease and what that means, along with systems disruption and the concept of system punked. We'll take a look at open source warfare and the concept of the Bazaar and how that should be understood as we go about building cyber defenses as well as cyber offensive capabilities. We'll look at some of the warfare characteristics around open source as well as low intensity conflicts and some of the proliferation of small arms out there. Crowdsourcing will be covered as well as the concept of emergent intelligence. And we'll close out with what I believe security should look like in this day and age. Now, hacktivists like Anonymous and Lulzec know no boundaries. Anonymous claims to follow the principle of freedom of speech as their guiding light, but in fact, as their public leadership, Barrett Brown, demonstrates, they actually use the ideas around freedom of speech as a rallying cry to censor others. Lulzec has become the militant arm of Anonymous, an organization that has no morals and follows no principles. In the world of online gaming, they have achieved God status and are currently running on an ego high. Their recent attacks on Sony, PBS, InfraGard Atlanta, associated with the FBI and Unveilance, as well as the current review and attacks against CSFI, demonstrate no rhyme or reason to their focus, only one of false bravado and juvenile pranks. Regardless, they are a skilled bunch who tip the scales of justice and have done so within their very organization, where tension currently exists between Anonymous and the Lulzec leadership. The inherent decentralization of cyber warfare tools means that the cost of conducting cyber warfare is rapidly declining. A simple attack that costs next to nothing can create damage that costs hundreds of millions in euros. Unlimited shelf life means that it is easy for anyone to network with others and their own particular obsession. They can raise a small army or find a dozen similarly minded people. The use of the low-orbit ion cannon with increased payload and used as a bot and distributed denial of service tool in peer-to-peer CPU sharing mode is such an example. Potential cyber warriors do not need to agree with the leadership. They don't need to get support from them or even know them. An IRC persona is all that it takes. System disruption is the use of cyber sabotage on critical systems to inflict economic pain, while system punked is a point in a system or an online market or marketplace that will collapse a target if it is destroyed or disrupted. For 9/11, the cost to execute was about $500,000 US, while the damage, both direct and indirect, cost $80 million. Assault on infrastructure system punked every few days replicates 9/11 cost once a month. Lulzec and the attack on Sony alone is over $200 million in losses for Sony and climbing. When it comes to hacktivists, their differences are based upon some principles, but even those are temporary. They believe that they are fighting a common enemy. It's their rallying cry, and that is anything and everything that is establishment. Stigmergy is a term used in biology to describe environmental mechanisms for coordinating the work of independent actors. Ants use pheromones to create trails, and people use weblogs and links to establish informal paths for others to follow. Stigmergy is used as a mechanism to understand underlying patterns in swarming activity, much like the swarming attacks by diverse bands of hacktivists, as exhibited by Anonymous. This is the pyramid of cyber warfare, or the realm of cyber warfare. It is relatively self-explanatory for the most part, a view from the bottom up. If you take a few moments to review this and discuss it with Paul and the rest of the team, I think that'd be great at this time. When you're ready, just hit enter when you need to proceed. The concept of open source warfare is upon us. Once a decision to launch cyber attacks is made, so they started off right. They purchase or steal botnets covertly from criminal networks to launch attacks or download freely available tools. They launch the attacks, they feed patriotic blogs to incite further attacks, and list targets. Recently, they tried to take over the highly enhanced DNS sinkhole capabilities of Unveilance. If they had, they could further mine organizational networks for sensitive information. They may have been able to monetize this information for personal and professional gain. They could have used this newfound wealth to build greater virtual capabilities. They could have potentially redirected botnet activities as a distributed denial of service. They may have been able to enhance the existing code and protocols with new navigational functions, advanced payloads, and more stealthy and powerful delivery mechanisms. In addition, they could have deceived organizations or nation-states into thinking another is attacking their critical infrastructures. The open source warfare concept takes a developmental model for free, libre, open source software, or FLOSS, and applies it to how cyber guerrilla movements learn and expand. The decentralized and seemingly chaotic guerrilla war in Afghanistan demonstrates a pattern that will likely serve as a model for next-generation cyber terrorists and nation-states. This pattern shows a level of learning, activity, and success similar to what we see in the open source software community. This pattern is called the Bazaar. The Bazaar solves a problem: how do small, potentially antagonistic networks combine to conduct war? Here are the factors that apply from the perspective of the cyber guerrillas. Release early and often. Try new forms of attacks against different types of targets early and often. Don't wait for a perfect plan. Given a large enough pool of code developers, any difficult problem will seem as obvious by someone and solved. Eventually, some participant of the Bazaar will find a way to disrupt a particularly difficult target. All you need to do is copy the process they used. Your code developers, or beta testers, are your most valuable resource. The other cyber guerrilla networks in the Bazaar are your most valuable allies. They will innovate on your plans, swarm on weaknesses you identify, and protect you by creating system noise. Recognize good ideas from your code developers. Simple attacks that have immediate and far-reaching impact should be adopted. Perfection is achieved when there is nothing left to take away. Simplicity. The easier the attack is, the more easily it will be adopted. Complexity prevents swarming that both amplifies and protects. And tools are often used in unexpected ways. An attack method can often find reuse in unexpected methods. Mimicking open source developers, cyber insurgent groups hack at the source code of warfare. By that I mean they aren't bound by the traditional rules of military engagement. They use whatever works, with their tactics, techniques, and procedures all open to scrutiny and improvement by the community. This is where innovation occurs. Although such groups are weak by conventional military benchmarks, they'd clearly be outgunned and outmanned on an open battlefield. They can still threaten strong national militaries. That's because they don't aim to invade, hold, or govern territory, but rather to exert political influence by exhausting an adversary's capacity to fight back. Their preferred method of attack is to disrupt infrastructure, whether virtual, financial, or political. System disruption is going to be the main thrust of cyber warfare for quite a long time, and hacktivists and others rely on these methods to help keep their enemies at bay. Now let's cover some of the characteristics of open source warfare. The first is many-body. There are many more autonomous cyber insurgent groups operating within conflicts than we had previously thought. From a hacktivist perspective, nothing brings people out for action like good old-fashioned idealistic issues. Fluidity. The cyber insurgents are loosely grouped together to form fluid networks with short half-lives. They go home at night and be with their families and chill. Redundancy. If we remove the strongest cyber group from the system, another group will rise to replace the previous strongest cyber group. Splinter. When a cyber group is broken, it does not generally split in half, but instead shatters into multiple pieces, and with it goes the virtual small arms. Redistribute. When a group is broken, the components are redistributed amongst the other cyber groups in the system. The redistribution is biased towards the most successful remaining cyber groups. Snowball. The strongest cyber groups grow fastest. tall poppy. The strongest cyber groups are the predominant targets for opposition forces' internal competition. There is direct competition amongst cyber-insurgent hacktivist groups for both resources and media exposure. They are competing with each other in addition to fighting the strongest cyber counterinsurgent forces. Independent coordination. Autonomous cyber groups act in a coordinated fashion as a result of the competition that exists between them. Anonymity is required. Emergent structure. Cyber attacks become less random and more coordinated over time. Evolution. The strategies employed by the cyber groups evolve over time, where successful groups and strategies survive and unsuccessful strategies and groups are replaced. High dimensional. Connection occurs over high dimensions, internet, cell phone, etc., and is not dominated by geographic connections. Old-fashioned technology such as internet relay chat service serves as new member recruiting stations. Non-linear. It is approximately 316 times harder to kill 100 people in an attack than it is to kill 10 people. Results for a conflict with alpha equals 2.5. Focus your crowdsource cyber activities on specific targets. Independent clones. The fundamental structure and dynamics of cyber insurgent groups is largely independent of religious, political, ideological, or geographic differences. These are some of the characteristics of open source warfare. Virtual small arms proliferation. Let's not overlook the shifting wind or boomerang problem computer malware. Like traditional chemical or biological warfare agents, it can potentially get away from you, drifting off course or boomeranging back, accidentally hitting your own forces or allies, or hitting uninvolved third parties rather than the enemy. However, if malware, much like Stuxnet, can learn to reliably distinguish friends from foes, unintended potential side effects may be able to be contained, and inhibitions which might otherwise deter potential use may be lowered or eliminated. The current activities over the past couple years of Anonymous demonstrate the same type of small arms proliferation, albeit in a virtual plane. Driven largely by ideological activities, Anonymous distributes a revamped version of the low-orbit ion cannon, LOIC, used in mass DDoS attacks. LOIC was the primary weapon used by Anonymous in its ongoing Operation Payback DDoS campaign against film and recording industry associations, as well as other organizations involved in anti-piracy efforts. The application was originally created by a user named Pratox and was used in several mass attacks over the years, including anonymous campaigns against the Church of Scientology, the Australian government, or the Iranian election protests. The code of the Windows program was released on SourceForge as an open source project, and a cross-platform Java version was later created, much like the Bazaar we discussed. This release allows for the proliferation of code that can be enhanced, improved, utilized in low-intensity conflicts with a potential for significant media coverage. Another developer branched off the code and added a new feature called HiveMind. This feature allows users to relinquish control over the application after installation and makes it act as a botnet client, which can be controlled from an IRC channel. This method of virtual small arms proliferation allows like-minded individuals to participate in DDoS activities based upon their ideology while giving up control to centralized resources. Someday we're going to need to get to a virtualized strategic arms limitations treaty. It's going to be required. Who's going to adhere to it? That will be determined later. With cyber crowdsourcing come opportunities for infiltration and cyber counterintelligence. For example, attributes of their communication platforms are transparency. Their platforms like internet, relay chat, or video chats are both static and dynamic. They must be viewable by external parties. Two-way. All the participants connected by the platform have the ability to interact, log, record, or extract content. And openness. The platform is open to all comers. and that any and all parties that want to provide innovations should be able to access the system and do so. This leads to capabilities for cyber intelligence collection, gathering, cyber counterintelligence, and potential counter-denial, counter-deception, and cyber espionage activities. So what makes emergent intelligence work? A critical mass of participation is required to move from a micro-action to a macro-action. EI ensures that local actions have a global impact. Random interactions within a network is necessary for learning. It impacts macro-action and drives the payload. Pattern matching, such as reading the writing on the wall for stigmergy, and anticipation. Openness to interaction. It's required to be promiscuous and take chances, which helps drive group intelligence. This is what makes EI work and is a core function of open source warfare. While under attack, our knee-jerk solution is usually to centralize security within the government. We see that happening today. It brings us to a see, detect, and arrest mentality, much like a police action. Government develops deeper sources, which become increasingly intrusive. This hurts us more than it helps us. It doesn't generate the desired information. It reduces domestic and international moral cohesion, and it often runs afoul of public opinion. This all gives credence and a cause to the hacktivists. What I believe we need to do is diversify our information security. We tend to circle the wagons and go back to the castle and moat mentality when threatened and feeling vulnerable. We retract. This is a detriment to asymmetrical cyber warfare. It is at this time that we need to decentralize and leverage our own crowdsourcing capabilities, generating innovative and organic cybersecurity defenses that include offensive cyber operations based upon cyber intelligence and counterintelligence. Our cybersecurity strategy must be one of resilience. It is my belief that we need to leverage the minds of the young for cyber warfare fighting. One thought is to analyze cyber warfare actions in online gaming. What do they do in any given situation? How can we apply that to real cyber warfare strategies? I thank you all for sitting through this presentation, and I again apologize for not being here, and by the time the day ends, I should be at the conference. To review, the summary is on the screen. I open it up to questions with the CSFI team leading the way and hope that I can meet you all soon. Thank you very much.